Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Beckham and the subject here is layers and smart filters and filter effects. Smart filters allow us more control and freedom to change the filter effects that we apply to our images. Now this is a good thing because adding filter effects is a creative and personal process, and it often requires us to duck and dive and to change things on the fly. Smart filters allow us to do this much more effectively. One of the things I found from experience is that most of the filters that I've applied over quite a number of years practically all work better with a lower resolution image. Now I can demonstrate what I mean much better than I can explain it. Filter effects, including the textures we apply to our images sometimes, they work on the image resolution. And sometimes, with our modern cameras, we've just got too much resolution. After all, we are making that decision to move away from photo quality to a more artistic image. Let's take a look with the two images I currently have on screen. There's two tabs up at the top left, and when I move between them you're hardly going to be able to see any difference. But if you look at the file names I've given them, this one is a full-size image from a 20 megapixel SLR. This one is half size. Let's take a quick look at the size of the large file first. Let's go to image and image size. We can see that the width is 20 inches by just over 11. And we have 300 pixels per inch. But what I've done with this one is to halve it. Image size. Here we've still got our 20 inches by just over 11, but we've only got half the amount of resolution. What I'm going to do is apply exactly the same texture to both of these. With the spinning round of the screen, what you're looking at here is the full-size image at 300 pixels per inch. I've applied a canvas texture set to the maximum scale of 200% with a relief of 4. Now I'll be surprised if you can hardly even see the texture on the video. Now we can if we look very carefully, but at this size it almost looks more like a mistake than an artistic application to the image. If I go up and select the one that's half that resolution, straight away we can begin to see the texture that's been applied. Exactly the same canvas, 200% scale with a relief of 4. So what I'm suggesting here is if we was going to print both of these images, I think the lower resolution one is going to give us a better result. I've got the zoom tool selected, and if I right click and choose print size, you can see we get a slight reduction in size on screen, but we can still see the texture. If I do the same with the full size one, right click and look at this at print size, it's a hard job to see the texture at all. So reducing the resolution isn't such an odd thing to do, because any filter effect we apply is going to remove the photo quality in place of a more artistic look. Now what I've chosen to do with this demonstration is, rather than reduce the resolution of a current 20 megapixel camera, what I've done is to look back at some of my old images, and this is one of them. And I've actually not reduced it at all, but when we look at the image size menu or the image size window, we can see that it amounts to much the same thing. We've got a 20-inch image if we wanted to print it, and we've got 150 pixels per inch. So this is the image we're going to use to apply our filter via a smart filter. I always begin a piece of work like this by making a direct copy of the image I start with. You can never be absolutely sure what a filter effect is going to do, so it's sometimes nice to have an original up your sleeve so you can bring back a bit of detail in various places should you need it. Of course you can always get the image and bring it in later. This is just a little more convenient, so I'm going to start with Control J to make a copy of my background. I'll turn my background off and we'll just leave it there as an insurance, and there's a good chance we may not even need it. I'm going to start with this one by making it into a smart filter. We can do that from the filter menu, convert for smart filters. We get this little dialog which we can tick not to show again. And once I've created it as a smart filter, we get that little symbol at the bottom right corner which tells me we're working with a smart object or a smart filter. We can make both in Photoshop, and to be honest they amount to much the same thing. Just before I apply the filter effect to this layer, it's worth remembering that if we apply a Photoshop filter straight from the filter menu, we have to accept that thousands of people before us have done exactly the same. It's quite common to see the same or similar filter effect applied to many images, especially in camera clubs. Now there are lots of third-party filters made by other manufacturers like Alien Skin and Topaz Labs. They are extremely good and I'd like to use one here, but of course they do incur a cost because we need to purchase them. So I'm going to go back to my filter menu. Down to the bottom I want Topaz Labs and I'm looking for Topaz Impression 2. When they appear on screen, we'll be given a series of thumbnails to choose from. If you don't see them, just click this little arrow here. You'll notice that in here we've got lots of different options. If we just look, let's say, at the painting options first. Here we have all of the presets, so as we select them we can see them applied to the image. What we can then do is to go to the edit and change them if we feel we need to. But at this stage, how do we know what we're going to do? We don't. So I'm going to go back and pick one which I think is going to work with this particular image. I'm going to go to my ancient batch, and this one here is called Cave Dweller 2. Now I don't think I need to make any changes to this just yet. All I'm going to do is to go down to the bottom right, click OK, and open this up into Photoshop. If you've applied filter effects before in Photoshop, then what you're looking at in the layers palette here may look just a little bit odd. But in actual fact, smart filters keep our image constantly editable until we decide to remove the smart filter status. The smart filter also comes with a layer mask, which we can see here, and that's going to allow strategic editing of the area we've filtered. So what the mask does here, because it's in slightly different place to where we normally see it, normally when we apply a mask we see it to the right of the thumbnail. Here its only job is to remove the filter effect. Let me quickly demonstrate that with black, a soft edge brush, and I'll push my flow rate up to 100%. If I make my brush really big, there you can see I can take the filter effect off using the mask. I'll put it back on this occasion with Control Z, but what it does allow us to do is maybe bring through a little bit of important detail a little bit more positively through the filtered effect. And maybe I would start around the guy and the front of the boat there, because compositionally that's fairly strong in the picture. So if I zoom in, what I could do here is select my mask and a brush, not quite as big as that, let's get that quite small. I can spray black with a standard soft brush, and I'm going to use a flow rate of around 10%. I just want to see if I can reveal the guy's legs a little better, and his body maybe, because I do think he's an important part of the picture. And there you can see I can just about do that, so that's okay. And I may even want to reveal maybe a little more detail, hit the wrong key then, a little more detail in the front of the boat maybe, just to take the filter effect off of that, just to bring that sort of, because it's almost like a little arrowhead to draw our attention to that compositionally strong position in the picture. Of course it's competing at the moment with lots of other highlights, but we'll see if we can deal with them a little later. We could decide to do something similar with these lamps because they look quite attractive, so maybe we could take just a bit of time, maybe just reveal them a little bit more positively from the filtered image, and even these ones up at the other end of the bridge, although these ones are a little bit better. You can see I'm doing this pretty quick and dirty. I'm not being overly fussy here, but you could be if you, or you could do if you really wanted to, but that's all I really wanted to do there. So we've seen one of the positive aspects of smart filters is the fact we have a layer mask. Just down here you can see it actually tells me that I've applied a Topaz impression filter. Well, if I did get to this point of the manipulation and decide that I wanted to try to make an adjustment to the picture inside of Topaz, what I can do is double click Topaz Impression there. It takes me straight back into the software and allows me to make a change. I could even select a different filter if I wanted to. I could select a different one from here, but if I did want to adjust the presets here with any of these options, and there are many, and we have lighting here which we can open up, and we have texture too. If I wanted to change any of those, then I could do so. One of the weaknesses of the picture is the edges. They're far too light and we need to do something with them. Now there's a number of different ways we can deal with this. What I think I may do here is create a new blank layer from the bottom of the layered stack and place that at the top of the layers. I'm going to define an area to flood with black. So I'm going to pick up my lasso tool. I'm going to make a lasso shape around the outer edge. As you can see, it's quite quick to do, and it's an irregular shape. I'm deliberately doing it by hand because I like the irregular shape that you get. At the moment, of course, we can only edit inside the marching ants, you can see, so I need to inverse that. I can do that via select inverse. I also need to soften the edge of the line. Now with an image of this resolution I think we need to be up 100 or a little more. I'm going to start with 100. We're viewing the image black and white, which is adequate for our needs here. So I need to be up somewhere around 100. That'll do. Click OK to that. I've got black as my foreground colour. Alt backspace will flood that. Control D will remove the selection. And even that I think is working pretty well. Now it's not until we see the vignette on the image that we can start to make a judgment. We could say that, well, it could be stronger down in the bottom left corner. It could be slightly stronger in the bottom right corner because they're not important areas of the picture. It could be a little weaker around those lamps, which I quite like the look of. It could be a little stronger up there and around there, and maybe even down this slope here. Well, one of the beauties of working in layers is this. What I can do is put another blank layer over the top of the one we just created, and I can now switch to the brush and do some very fine manual work on a separate layer. Now if it goes wrong I can just dump it, and I've still got this below which is working to, let's say, 80% of my satisfaction. So I'm going to work on this layer with black with a soft edge brush. I'm going to need my brush to be quite low, so I'm going to set a flow rate of 5%. I may even need to go lower. I'm going to drop the size of my image down a little bit so I can just come in from the edge, and you can see the sort of delicate work that I want to do here. Around here I can be a bit more positive, and maybe around here too, and 5% is just about right, I would suggest, and a little bit here, just brushing over these areas, maybe a little bit in on that corner. You can see this is all very, very personal. We're all going to do something a little different here, but we work until we feel we've got the picture looking as we would like it. Control 0 will set it back on screen. Now of course I'm happy with those two layers, so if I select both of them with the control key, I can right click and just say to Photoshop, just merge them two together. So there's my entire vignetting on one layer. So now if I want to tease it back, just over on the right hand side here, add a mask to do it. Use the same black, the same brush, and even the same flow. We can drop the brush down a little bit, we can just paint over this area, just to raise those up just a little bit. Maybe make sure they're okay. You can see the sort of thought processes that go into doing what I'm doing. When we apply a filter to our images, they don't all come with a texture. This one does have one. If I zoom in a little bit, it's almost got a oldie-worldy cracked paint look, which is working particularly well, I would suggest, with this sort of effect. But not all filters come with a texture. Sometimes we may want to put our own on. And here's one of the ways we can do it. Rather than flattening all this together and applying the texture to the image, we can apply that to a new layer too. I'll make sure I've got my top layer selected, because as I create a new layer, it will then be placed right at the top where we need it. I'm going to go to my layers at the top left of the screen. I'm going to choose New Layer, and here I'm going to choose the mode Overlay, and down here I'm going to tick the box to say fill the overlay with 50% neutral grey. Now you would think that if we had a new layer sitting on the top of the stack and we flooded it with colour, that it would obliterate all of the layers underneath and they'd all disappear. But in fact they don't, because of the overlay blend we're using here. What I can now do on this layer is apply a texture, but we could also apply the texture to a smart filter, so we could make that layer into a smart filter too. Then go back to Filters, Texture, Texturizer. I'm going to choose a fairly big texture here because I'm actually putting one texture over another. Click OK, and there's the texture applied. Now the great thing of working with smart filters, of course, is I've got a mask to remove the filter in areas where I don't particularly want it, and if I change my mind or I want to decrease the setting or increase the setting, if I just double click Texturizer on the bottom of the mask there, we can go straight back in. We could make the scaling bigger, we could make the relief less, so we can try various different effects before we're happy with the final result. And of course, if we just want to live with the original, then we can do that too. Maybe if we put a little bit of a texture in some of these areas, we could mask it away elsewhere, so we actually have a picture with two types of texture. Now with the spinning round of the screen, what I've just done is I've used the texturizer here. I've gone back into the burlap and I've increased the texture depth so you can see it quite strong over the entire image. But if I select the mask, what I can do is flood the mask with black. Alt backspace will do that. When you think what I've done here, I've put a texture on using the layer at the top, then I'm taking it away with the mask. But that means if I switch to white instead of black on my mask, I can live with the texture maybe in these areas above and below the bridge, but here I can brush in maybe a different texture and I can avoid my man there, and I can do something along those lines if it was my interest to do that sort of thing. Now, the best advice I can give with work like this is, at this stage, save it as a layered file and see if you can leave it at least overnight and come back the next day. Because when you do, you're almost certain to make some changes. But at some stage, of course, we may want to flatten the image to finish. So once we have the image flattened, we can do a little bit of local dodging and burning, taking down some of those obtrusive highlights and raising some of the areas that are interesting, like the globes of the lamps, and also just touching out one or two distractions. Now, one of the odd things about photography, of course, and anything we do in and around it, is it's all very subjective. But I've mentioned, I think, a couple of times throughout these particular videos, and I know I've mentioned it many times before, that there's a great benefit in sleeping on something. In other words, when you're working on a creative piece of work, to shove it aside and come back another day. Now, when I've looked at the image I created here, something was bothering me, and in the end I realized it was that vignette. I hadn't made a very good job of that, but that's the nature of what we do. But of course, if we always save our layered files, we can come back to any stage we like and pick up where we left off and take a slightly different tack if we want. What I've done here is decided to abandon that vignette and to apply an edge effect. There's the edge effect. I'll turn it on and you'll see the effect of it. When you look at the edge effect on its own, that's what it looks like. You can find plenty of those on the internet and you can create them yourself. I'm not entirely sure yet whether I'll cover this topic in our layers set of videos. But what I've done here, I have a white center and the shaded area is black and grey, and when we select darken mode, it blends nicely with the image, because of course when it's first dragged into the layered set, you can see it looks something like this. So when we select darken mode, the image shows through the light areas and we can see the edge effect. Of course we can tweak the edge effect because it's on a separate layer. So if I brought up my free transform tool, I could tweak that top out a little bit or back a little bit, depending on what I felt looked right.